Blue Lock, a sports anime where Ego Jinpachi gathers the top 300 high school football players in Japan and makes them compete in a battle royale. The winner will be the true egoist and will become the striker who will change Japan's football forever. If you've watched all 24 episodes of Season 1 or read the manga to at least Chapter 93, you will see the surviving 35 players so far in Blue Lock, which prompts the question, who played with who in the first selection? Well, we know the original 300 players were separated into 5 different stratums, each containing 60 players. Each stratum was broken into 5 teams, ranked V, W, X, Y, and Z, each having 12 players. The survivors of the first selection would be the top 2 teams, each containing 11 players, and the top scorer of the 3 losing teams, for a total of 25 players per stratum. In the original stratum, we had both Team V and Z survive, while the top scorer of the other 3 teams making it through, including Team W's Wanama, Team X's Baro, and Team Y's Nico. For Team Z, we had Kuon, Raichi, Imamaru, Iamon, Ikaguri, Narahaya, and Gagamaru, as well as Chikiri, Kunigami, Bachira, and lastly, Isuki. Team V, the other surviving team, includes the main trio Zentetsu, Ryo, and Naki, plus their additional 8 teammates, whose names are listed in the Egoist Bible, including Masumi, Shuhai, Sota, Kanji, Kisaburo, Rikia, Retsu, and Hirokazu. And so we know all 25 survivors of the original stratum. Since we know every player in the original stratum, we can ignore them for the rest of the video and focus on the 4 unknown ones. Before talking about the characters, I want to discuss about the shoe colours. In the anime, we get a clear visual colour of the players' shoes, which are significant in identifying which teams they played for in the first selection. For example, Team Z have blue shoes, Nico's Team Y have red, Baru's Team X have white, Wanama's Team W have green, and Team V have black. This idea is further proved as we see the teams walk in after completing the second selection. As we see known characters like Nagi, Baro, and Jigiri's shoes match the colours from first selection, as well as other teams such as Nico's and Raichi's. That means we can infer the players' teams from the first selection, such as Kira being from Team W and Hiyori being a Team V player. And so we can sort each character into their respective teams, with the exception of 3 characters who we don't see the shoes at least once. In the beginning of the third selection, Isugi selected to play in the first game on Team A, with the full roster being Isugi, Nanase, Hiyori, Rin, and Shido, where they play against Team B's Karasu, Otoya, Chigiri, Saramadara, and Shiguma. When walking into the match, we know that neither Hiyori or Nanase knew each other, and when they first meet Rin and Shido, it seems that Nanase greets him as it's his first encounter. Meanwhile, Hiyori asks Isugi if he knows them prior. Since Nanase is a Team Z player, there is a chance he never met the other Team V players, and could have played against each other in the first selection while being on opposing teams. However, I'm more inclined to believe that Nanase did not know the other 3 Team V players beforehand. Similarly, I believe Hiyori did not know the other Team V players either, which will be explained further in the video. We also know that Rin and Shido don't know each other through their implications and interactions, as we see Shido say, "So that guy is number 1. Assuming these Team A players didn't know each other in the first selection, we can break each character into a different stratum, and since we can ignore Isugi's stratum, we can focus on the other 4, being Rin's, Shido's, Nanase's, and Hiyori's stratums. And using this information, we can break each character into a separate stratum. As we enter the match, we see Karasu in Chapter 98 install information about Shido, inferring they didn't know each other prior. We then see in Chapter 99 that Hiyori talks about Karasu and knowing him prior to Blue Lock. Judging on how in Isugi stratum we see the Wanama twins and Chigiri, Ryo and Nagi, and Isugi and Kira, I would say there's a high likelihood that Ego would place Hiyori and Karasu in the same stratum too. We also see in the match that Otoya could get behind Rin, where he proceeded to score. Although not definitive, the fact Rin couldn't read Otoya leads me to believe they haven't played with each other yet. Meanwhile, Hiyori had moments where he could understand Otoya's strengths. We also see that Hiyori knew that Otoya was a ninja descendant, and so overall I think there's a high likelihood that the trio of Hiyori, Otoya, and Karasu played in the first selection. Additionally, they were all Team V players too, and using this information I'll place Karasu and Otoya both in Hiyori's stratum. The next stratum I want to delve into more is Nanase's, and by extension, the 4th clear team. If we look at the extra chapter in Volume 12, we can see the lineups of all the second selection clear teams, which could hint about their joining orders. We see that in general, the top 3 in the Pentagons are the initial 3. Usually, the top position character is the first member, the left player is the second to join, like Ayu, Baru, Hiyori and Igarashi, and the right player being the third, like Chigiri and Tokimitsu. Although, Ryo being bottom right kinda breaks the formation. And so, assuming this formation actually hints something, if we look at the 4th clear team, we can see that Endoji and Tsunzaki played with Nanase, and if they were the original 3 to join, like the other observed clear teams, then there's a chance they were from the same stratum. And since Tsunzaki was also a Team Z player, I believe there's a high likelihood those two played together in the first selection. Of course, they could just be Team Z players who teamed up due to having similar numbers, but I'm more inclined to believe they played in the same team. Another reason I believe they are teammates is mainly because of Nanase's portrayal. In the first 3rd selection match, we see that Isagi comments about his skill level, and from what we observe, he doesn't have any known talents like Bachira's dribble. He is one of the few characters that's mentioned to be weak, and overall doesn't scream a high level player. If Nanase is truly as bad as his portrayal, then him surviving due to having fellow teammates feels more likely, and with only 2 other confirmed Team Z players, I would guess he is not a sole survivor and had Tsunzaki as a teammate. My favourite background character, the star-eyed Endoji, is one of the 3 players with our team confirmed. We do see him briefly play in the final 3rd selection match. Here, we get a glimpse of his shoe colour, which although monochrome, resembles the shoes that the other Team Z players wore earlier, and if that's true, then he would be a Team Z player too. Meaning, there would be 4 Team Z players in total, which means they're all top scorers, or more likely, one Team Z had multiple survivors. I believe that Endoji was part of Nanase's original team, and particularly because of Tsunzaki. If we look at the background images, we constantly see both characters hang out, and in close proximity of each other. Of course, they could have bonded during this second selection, but I think it's more likely the trio played together, just like how we know the original Team Z players try to form teams with people they were familiar with. And so I'd make the guess that Endoji and Tsunzaki were Nanase's teammates in the first selection. The next player I want to discuss is Kiora. We know he was a Team W player and was the 5th to join Nagi's second selection team. He is an extremely mysterious player with no dialogue and very limited screen time so far. A potential hint is seen in the spin-off novel episode Nagi, where we see that Kiora is on the same page as Baru, Shido and Rin, who are all the top scorers of their stratums. This could foreshadow or imply that he was also a top scorer in his stratum, or him having a larger role in the second selection. If he was a top scorer, then he can't be in Rin's or Shido's stratum. And since Karasu and Otoya were in the same team too, and being a clear tier above the non-top 6 players, means I have my doubts that Kiora scored more than them, and so I would guess he would have a high chance of being in Nanase's stratum, with no top 6 confirmed. We also know that he is the 5th to join the second clear team, he won his 3rd selection match, and was good enough to be a sub-member for the U20 bench. The main problem is on Barca Munich, he was rated 2nd lowest, which would be weird for a hypothetical top scorer. On the contrary, I still believe he was the top scorer in that stratum, and I have another theory I intend to fully write later, including how he was the one to be Baru's original team, his role in the future PXG match, and why he has such a low ranking. But for now, I'll just make the guess he was from Nanase's stratum. The next duo I want to discuss are Nishioka, aka Aomori's Messi, and the tallest high schooler, Ishikari. Nishioka isn't confirmed as a Team V player, as he was injured in the second selection, but Ishikari was, and I'm inclined to believe they played in the same team in the first selection. The main reason I believe this is in chapter 39, where we see Nishioka stand with Ishikari, the bald-headed guy in the top 15, and the rest of his team. Since this was right after the first selection, the players were standing with their teams, meaning there's a high chance that the duo played with each other in the first selection. What's also interesting is that Nishioka is from Aomori, while Ishikari, who shares a place with the sub-prefecture, Ishikari, is located relatively close, meaning they could have played with each other prior to Blue Lock. Since we see the majority of Ishikari's and Nishioka's team, I believe it's likely that they were the only survivors from the 3rd selection from their original team. And so I do believe they were part of Nanase's stratum, since there are no confirmed Team V players there yet. The next 2 characters to discuss are the stylish Ayu and the anxiety-filled Tokimitsu, who were both introduced in the second selection. If you've seen the extra chapter of how the top 3 met, it is confirmed they didn't know each other prior. Since those 3 are all Team V players, that indicates they must have been from separate stratums. When we are introduced to everyone in chapter 93, we see every new character and see some reactions from the others, mainly being the reaction of Ayu and Toki in the 4th clear team, a team comprised of mainly Nanase's proposed stratum. When the 4th team enter, we see Tokimitsu panic and state how they look strong, which you wouldn't say if they played in the first selection. And if I'm right about Nishioka being Nanase's stratum, then Toki being there is even less likely, as we see Toki's reaction of him. Meaning Toki either played in Hiyori's or Shido's stratum, as he was confirmed not in Rin's stratum and unlikely in Nanase's. Meanwhile, Ayu just admires how they all look stylish as they enter, which doesn't imply or deny his relationship with him, especially compared to Toki. Assuming Nishioka's team being correct, then Ayu must be in either Hiyori's or Shido's stratum too. And since Toki and Ayu must be in different stratums, then one must be in Shido's while the other in Hiyori's. If I had to guess, I would say Toki being in Shido's stratum feels more correct. Tokimitsu being scared and filled with anxiety, although extremely bulky, playing with Shido who's incredibly violent, could make a funny gag if the author ever wanted to explore that path, and seems more likely than Shido beating up Ayu. The final Team V player to discuss is the 4-eyed model Yukimiya. In the Team A vs Team C match, we see Yuki play against both Rin and Shido. In the 1v1 matchup against Rin, Yuki easily dribbles past him, with Rin looking shocked. Yuki was also the first person to question why Rin was placed above him, which raises my doubts of them being previous teammates. After dashing past Rin, he goes to 1v1 Shido, and his reaction makes it seem like it's their first encounter. What's interesting is Ayu was able to read Yuki's first gyro shot, which could be Ayu reading the shot well, or him having previous knowledge of it. In chapter 150 after the U20 match, we see that Yuki hangs out with Karasu, Otoya, Ayu, Toki, and Ryo, which is comprised of mainly Hiyori's proposed stratum. Of course they could have bonded during the second selection, but it could hint to them being teammates in the first, just like how we see Isugi, Bachira, and Chigiri hang out. If I had to guess, I would say it's unlikely Yuki played in Rin's or Shido's stratum, but a decently high chance he was from Hiyori's, especially if we consider Nishioka's proposed team. The main problem I have with this team is how absolutely stacked it is, with all the other Team V players only having 1 to 3 players survive. This is mainly a theory, and so I won't guarantee the positions are correct, especially as the video goes further and further. For example, the Team V players could be split in other combinations, like Nishioka being in Rin's stratum, and then have Ayu and Yuki separated from the Karasu trio. However, for clarity's sake, I will just say the one from earlier, as I'm more confident in that theory. Going back to the 3rd selection arc, we get to see more relationships between the fodder characters. Tanaka, the gross Afro man, is a Team W player, and what we know is his team made it through the first selection together. And since only the top 2 teams per stratum make it through, that means he can't be from Nanase's stratum. We also see him briefly play in the Team A vs Team C match, where he struggled against the giant Ishikari, with Tanaka showing signs of unfamiliarity. We also know Tanaka is ranked 5th in the 2nd selection, and having such a low number means I have my doubts about him playing with Corona previously. The Surfer, aka the Predator, Saramadara, is the final Team W player to discuss. We know he can't be in Nanase's stratum, and there's a high likelihood he wasn't in Tanaka's team, although we don't see all 11 players from the team. We also know that he was unlikely from the same stratum as Shiguma. As we see in the extra chapter, Shiguma doesn't talk to strangers. We also see Karasu orders him to play defense, which will show a sign of unfamiliarity between the both of them. As the match continues, we do see his reaction to Shido and his shock from his goal, which could indicate they never played against each other. The other player in the match was Shiguma, aka the Golem, who was likely a sole survivor as a Team Z player. I doubt Nanase's team would have all 4 Team Z players survive, and we never see Shiguma with any of them, and we know it's unlikely that he and Saramadara were from the same stratum. We do see him go get food together and were teammates with Tanaka during the 2nd selection, which could indicate they knew each other during the 1st or bonded during the 2nd. The final 6 characters are even harder to decipher, as they all have very limited interactions with each other, and so they can be any combination of the remaining players. Surprisingly, we see very little of Corona prior to the NEL arc. We know he ranked 4th in the 2nd selection, which could hint he wasn't familiar with other low numbers such as Tanaka. We know Corona was part of Shido's team in both the 2nd and 3rd selection teams. Corona is a Team Y player, and so he couldn't have played in Shido's team, but perhaps he played in his stratum. We also know that Karuna and Sakura were both Team Y players, both surviving on the 7th clear team, but it's important to note they joined as 4th and 5th members, as that means it's unlikely they started as a trio. We also see him eat with both Yuzu and Sakura, which could imply some sort of relationship, especially since Yuzu wasn't part of the 7th clear team. Continuing with Yuzu and Sakura, we know both players played in the Team B vs A match, their team losing 5-2, with neither player making the bench. Yuzu being a Team X player while the other two being Team Y makes me think that Yuzu played against at least one of them during the first selection. Also in Team B, we have Hiragi. Unlike the other two players, Hiragi was good enough to be in the bench, even while losing 5-2. The fact Hiragi lost that bad means it's likely that he could coexist and link with both Karasu and Otoya. Although not saying much, we do see Hiragi play with Raichi against Nico and Yuki. We also see on the monitor that Hiragi plays with rank 62 on Team Red, a different colour to the final 4th clear's colour, implying he lost and eventually got picked up by Nanase's team. The other 4th clear team member is Haichi, where we know he won his 3rd selection match. There's also Toki's comment which could apply to them. Lastly, Himizu, who probably has the least amount of information. We don't see his shoes at all, and he has no interactions, which means his shoe colour is basically unknown. If I had to guess, I would say he's a Team X player. That way, the W, X and Y teams all have 4 survivors. We see in a monitor he plays with rank 115, where he likely lost and eventually got picked up by Karasu's team. We could guess where the remaining 9 players go, but we can find more information by looking at some of the eliminated characters. After the first selection, we see more Stratums walk in. If you look at Tanaka's team, you notice only 6 players, and so he could have 5 more. If you see the panel above, you notice 7 players, implying they can't be from the same team, but perhaps the same stratum. I say that because we see Tanaka stand with the players from the above panel, indicating a high chance they're from the same stratum. We also see in the other team that one member resembles Ayu from Team V, while Tanaka a Team W player. If these two characters were indeed Ayu and Tanaka, I would say there's a high chance that they played in the same stratum. Further down the page, we see 2 highlighted players, who I'd guess were the sole survivors of that stratum, with both characters having unique designs and being seen since chapter 1. We also basically get to see all 11 players from Nishioka's proposed team, or at least players from his stratum. If we zoom into the complaining characters, we see they have white shoes, indicating that at least one Team X survived. The other screen characters from the next panel also seem to have white shoes, and so I'm inclined to believe those 10 were in the same team. That means that no Team X survivor played with each other in the first selection. In another stratum, we see 2 isolated players who are in the top 15, where we know at least one was a Team W player. If they are the sole survivor, then he and Saramadara would fill the separate teams, as I doubt there would be a second Team W survive. And if they were from Tanaka's team, they would likely team up during the second selection. And so for Team W, I believe it was Tanaka's team that survived, and the 3 sole survivors from the other stratums being Kiora, Saramadara, and the random top 15 character. We also get to see 2 more groups of players, but neither give distinctive teams or implications, and so could be Team V players or fodders from other known teams. If I had to guess, I would say that a Team Y also survived. That way there's a team that survives for each letter. And if you consider that we know 3 Team Y survivors already, with a chance that at least one of the solo players were a Team Y player too, plus both Isagi and Ryo identifying 2 unique Team Y players, both ranked in the bottom 3 of their team, leads me to believe that a Team Y also existed. And so using all the relationships and knowledge discussed, we can make some educated guesses on who actually played with each other. To summarize, I believe that Shiguma played in either Rin's or Shido's stratum, being in the one without Saramadara. I think Hiragi played in Karasu's stratum before with the other 2 survivors, meaning this stratum would be complete. I'd guess the 2 top 15 players were from the same stratum, with both being the sole survivors. Yuzu was either part of Team X with Sakura being the sole survivor in that stratum, or Yuzu being the sole survivor with Sakura and Karuna on the same team. I think Haichi was the sole survivor as I didn't see him with the other 2 Team Y players. Judging on the other stratums Team X's, then Himizu would be in Nanase's. Depending on who goes where in Team W, I think it's likely one of these 3 options, with Rin's and Shido's stratums being interchangeable with each other. Since there are so many characters and possibilities, just know there's a decently high chance of me being wrong. Since I'm guessing anyone who watched to this point wants to know a definitive answer, I believe it was option 3, as it seems to have the most observations discussed in the video. As the spin-off continues, we will likely see more interactions and hopefully we can expand on this theory. And lastly, thanks for watching and take care.